Hello, students, and welcome back to our continuing discussion of biodiversity. Yesterday, we talked about several reasons why biodiversity is or should be important to you and to us as a species and to the planet at large. Well, today we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about what some of the threats to biodiversity include. So let's pick up in our notes here for today and talk about what are some of the threats to biodiversity, things that endanger the existence of biodiversity, either locally, regionally, or globally. So, number one, the number one threat to biodiversity on planet Earth today, without question, is habitat destruction. Habitat destruction. If you are familiar with the Dr. Seuss story, The Lorax, you know how the Lorax speaks for the trees, if you please. And the entire book is about environmental issues focused on habitat destruction and how the Swami swans had to leave and how the fish had to leave and how what are those bears called? The other creatures had to leave because they lost their habitat from the over construction and utilization of the habitat. If it had been done in a more wise manner, and we'll focus on that next week, it's called stewardship. But if stewardship were practiced, then the habitat would not be completely destroyed. But habitat destruction, such as occurs with deforestation, desertification, wetland destruction, all of these impact the loss of biodiversity at various levels. We just mentioned the Lorax and the deforestation, but this happens around the world. In fact, one of the biggest losses of biodiversity today is in the rainforests, where forests are being cut and burned, slashed and burned, removed from the region in order to create grazing areas, grazing farms for cattle, because there's a lot of money involved in raising cattle for beef production. The unfortunate thing about this in the rainforest region, however, is that these rainforests, which are being cut down, I heard one statistic, it was like 7,000 acres every hour are being cut down in the rainforest. Once they're cut down, they don't grow back. Rainforests, by their very nature, are extremely mature and old, and it takes centuries for any hope in restoring rainforests to areas where they have been cut down. You see, most of the fertility in a rainforest is up in the canopy of the trees, not in the soil. And so once you cut those trees down and you burn them, you've destroyed the productivity of that forest. Well, number one, you've cut it down, but you've destroyed and eliminated where all of the natural resources are. The soil is very poor, and the ranch lands that are created don't last too long because those soils aren't suited for grazing. So it's like a quick solution to an urgent economic need. But if there were ways that we could change that and reduce deforestation, especially in some regions of our planet, it would go a long way to maintain and perhaps even increase the levels of biodiversity to help us all. Think about the ecotourism, perhaps, that we mentioned yesterday. Desertification. You know what the end result is of the cutting down of rainforests? It's basically those areas turning into deserts. And you know what a desert is like. It's dry and there's not much biodiversity. And deserts actually grow. The Sahara Desert is constantly growing. There once was a flourishing civilization in Egypt, you may remember from learning in social studies with the Great Pyramids. But that whole region of Africa is part of the Sahara Desert today. Why? Perhaps there was a loss of biodiversity at some point in the past, and as a result, it increased desertification. Wetland destruction. Here's something that happens around here as well. You know, most people think of swamps as a wasteland. Wetland is viewed as wasteland by many people. There is a famous national preserve right here in our own state of New Jersey called the Great Swamp. And the Great Swamp, about 60 years ago, was being considered for a major airport, bigger than Newark, LaGuardia, JFK, all put together. It was going to be a massive mega jet port. And thankfully, there were enough people who fought it because the Great Swamp National Refuge area is chock full of biodiversity. If that jet port had been built, it would have basically destroyed that entire wetland, paved over it. It would have devastated the groundwater supply for millions of human beings. It would have destroyed the water quality in the surrounding rivers and the ocean, which make billions of dollars in ecotourism in our state every year by people loving to go down the shore. Those things would have been at risk, not to mention the lack of biodiversity of so many other organisms. So, habitat destruction is huge. And number two, let's move on to number two. Changing communities. Now, this doesn't mean picking up from one place and moving to another. The word community here has specific reference to life science, and we've learned this term in the past. A community is a combination of different organisms that live in a particular area. And there is something going on right now. I mean, it's been going on for some decades, but every single one of you watching this video undoubtedly is familiar with exotics. Exotic plant or exotic animal species. They are ravaging regions of North America right now. They are taking over habitat or resources and killing other species off. Our ash trees that baseball bats are made out of may soon be no more because of the ash beetle that is destroying the ash trees. Let's not even mention stink bugs and how they stink so bad. They're an invasive species that no natural critter here wants to even go near. We have so many organisms that are invasive species that are wreaking havoc on local and regional ecosystems and causing millions and billions of dollars worth of damage and impact on the human species. So when we talk about invasive species, we're not talking about something that necessarily looks like this, looks like an alien, although this dude is made up by a number of invasive species, like I think his nose, for instance, is made out of the gypsy moth caterpillar, an invasive species that doesn't belong, and a number of years ago was destroying large tracts of forest land here in the northeastern United States. An invasive species. So, what are some of these invasive species? Well, I may ask you to do a little bit of research and find out about some of these invasive species, but some of them might look familiar to you here. But in fact, here's the gypsy moth caterpillar. Oh my. In fact, the spotted lanternfly, which I actually don't have a picture of here, but the spotted lanternfly has become such an issue. This poster here has been made up again with the spotted lanternfly's picture on it. And the experts are saying whenever you see the spotted lanternfly, kill them. Kill them. There are regions of our country, including where we live right here, that there are bans on the transport of wood and wooden furniture from one place to another because the spotted lanternfly has become such a terrible issue in destroying so many plants that didn't exist where they came from in Asia, but now they have a whole host of organisms, trees in particular, that have no natural defense against them. And they're just taking over things. So if you see spotted lanternflies, get rid of them. So here are some of the most important pathways of introduction, which means these are some of the ways that some of these critters get to places where they shouldn't be. I'm sorry, I got the hiccups right here. By the way, this is the zebra mussel. It clogs up water intakes for city water. It gums up engines in boat engines. It has caused hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to humans. And these are little shell critters that are aquatic species. And there are a variety of ways that they can be transmitted or carried from one place to another. One way is on the hulls of ships. If you do any boating and you put your boat in one body of water and you don't clean your boat hull before you put it into another body of water, you could be transmitting the eggs of these organisms or eggs or organisms of other kinds that will be invasive. The aquarium trade, pet trade, canal building, all of these are examples of ways that some of these critters can get from one place to another. I think these zebra mussels started in the Great Lakes and just devastated some of the cities around the Great Lakes, and they've made their way out here to the east in the Delaware River. So beware. The multiflora rose. Oh my goodness. If you have ever done any gardening or walked in the woods, you've probably come into contact with multiflora rose. It was brought in from another continent, intended to be a quick fix solution for barbed wire. But unfortunately, it didn't stay around the fields of cattle. It has taken over many fields with cattle and other locations as well. I mean, multiflora rose just spreads. Forest pests. We have mentioned a number of forest pests already. They can be transmitted or transported through the plant trade, wood packing materials, crates, pallets, spools. I mean, think about how many millions and millions of crates, boxes, containers, trailers, etc., are transported in and out of countries every day. You may recall recently there was a traffic jam on the Suez Canal, one of the major canals in the world, and it blocked the shipping channels for a few days. It was costing almost $100 billion per day because of the inability of ships to travel. That money comes from goods, products which are shipped from one country to another. Our world has become very small with regards to materials being transported from one country and one continent all the way across the world to another. This is unprecedented throughout history. And years ago, when people traveled with much slower means, like by foot or by horseback, by the time a new species would arrive somewhere else, there would be a gradual increase in that ecosystem's ability to fight it off. Not anymore. Not anymore. Some invasive species from Australia could be on board a plane and 12 hours later land here in the United States, disembark, and without any natural predators, that invasive species can just take over, like so many of these other invasive species have over the last few decades. So, something very important to keep in mind. But let's move on to number 3. Another threat to biodiversity is intentional killing. That's right, intentional killing. Now, I want to mention a word called poaching. I know some of you watching this video may be legal hunters, and that's okay. In fact, here in New Jersey and in this part of the state, controlling the deer population is extremely important. That is why it is managed. That is why you get a license to go hunting, and you have limits to how many deer you can bag or kill in a particular season, because those populations are managed in a scientific manner that prevents wild fluctuations to the population of deer and other dependent species. But poaching is something else. Poaching is illegal. Poaching is not monitored. Poaching is even worse, the illegal hunting of protected species. Certain species on our planet are protected with different status, like the threatened status or the endangered status, because their numbers are in sharp decline. And they need to be managed and watched carefully so that those species don't go extinct. Unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous poachers out there in the world who are willing to pay lots of money to illegally hunt protected animals just for the thrill of it. And that is not only illegal, but it is certainly unethical if you value biodiversity on planet Earth. Not only to help us as humans, but to help our planet as well. Here are some of the biggest examples, and I mean that size-wise, of trophy animals that are illegally poached. Rhinoceros, elephants, tigers. They shouldn't be turned into medicine trinkets or rugs. Now, the medicine thing, we mentioned that yesterday. We've been able to isolate some chemicals that are used for medicinal purposes, but that's more of a cultural thing in some Asian countries than a legitimate medicine that cures diseases. It's typically an aphrodisiac. And you can look that word up on your own if you'd like. So, intentional killing, not good, in addition to being illegal. But accidental killing is also a threat to biodiversity. The unintentional killing of organisms. We live not far away from the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. And at certain times of years during mating season, there's a road called River Road along the Delaware River, which is shut off for traffic because there is a threatened species of salamander, an amphibian, that has to cross the road in order to mate. If that road were not shut down just for a couple of weeks each year, it's a minor detour, folks. But if they didn't shut that down, there'd be enough traffic to squish, squash, and kill all of those salamanders, and that species could potentially be driven to extinction. Think about it. Something as easy as as diverting traffic can save the lives of individuals, but also a species as well. There is unintentional killing that takes place every day when you're driving down the road and you hit a deer. I mean, loads of deer are hit by cars, or I should say, deer hit cars around here, but running over skunks and possum and foxes and all the other poor critters that are trying to travel our roads. You know, those are unintentional killings. That is not illegal intentional killing like poaching. So, unintentional deaths caused by human activities. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something else here. Uh, if you look at this page here, I know there's a lot of information here, but I'll mention what's written in red. Collisions, we already mentioned that. And I think I mentioned in class the other day about birds flying into windows of buildings and dying, or communication or power lines. They get fried. Also, I think I mentioned last week about how some of them fly into not weather vanes, but windmills and get whacked. Poisoning, whether intentional or unintentional. Pesticides that we use. A pest is anything, any living critter that is somewhere where we don't want it. Side, any word that ends in ICIDE, refers to death or killing, like homicide, suicide. Uh, what are some other sides? Well, pesticide, insecticide. They all involve herbicide. They all involve killing something. Pesticides kill pests, but what is a pet? A pest to me might be a valued organism to someone else. Oil spills. Here's one that usually makes the news. You can see the picture of this bird here that was detrimentally affected by the inadvertent oil spill that, once petroleum oil gets onto a bird like this, their chance of survival is nearly nothing. Attacks by introduced predators, loss of degradation of habitat by catching them too much. You know, there are so many unintentional deaths caused by human. That last one, for instance, I love tuna fish. I love tuna fish. But sometimes dolphins are caught in tuna nets and can kill them. So there are ways to avoid that. And you should look at tuna fish companies to see whether they are sensitive to those needs or not. All right. Well, we've talked a lot about the threats to biodiversity here today. Hopefully, you still have some time to watch some of the videos I'm linking you to, and that will prepare us for tomorrow's activity dealing with web of life. Bum, 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 bum. Hopefully, we'll have some fun in the lab tomorrow with this activity. And so until tomorrow, I'll say bye bye.